Bigo de Go. Welcome to African Experts with Vickie Remoe, the show that brings you African entrepreneurs, practitioners, researchers, and innovators with big ideas and insights on issues shaping African lives. If you're just joining us today for the first time, Couche. We are here every Sunday to ask big questions and to learn from African experts and viewers like you. If you are not, shockingly, there are people who are still not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel. Make sure you do so now so you never miss an episode. Before we get into today's conversation, here are a couple things to remember. This is a live show. Should we lose internet connectivity or electricity, please do not leave as we will be right back. Now, I invite you to engage with each other in the comments, ask questions as they will be answered at the end. And also, if you're watching, absolutely share this on your Twitter, on your Facebook, on your IG, and on your YouTube, everywhere. You can even post it into a WhatsApp conversation. Let's get started. For most of our lives, we were led to believe that men experience more sexual pleasure than women. That there were biological differences that made women want sex less. Society tells us that women are sexually passive, and in the media, women are often depicted as the object of sexual desire, there for the gratification of men, and never the other way around, or rarely. We're made to believe that women just don't want or need sex like men do. This is a very, very big lie, a big fat lie. However, it has created inequity in who gets pleasure in the bedroom. Women's sexual pleasure takes a backseat to men's. Across the continent, many women even believe the myth around their own sexual desire. Religion, social conditioning, and customs promote a Madonna-whore dichotomy where women can either be saints or sluts, pure virgins or bad and promiscuous. Today, I'm talking to an advocate for the sexual liberation of African women, a writer and a researcher who has spent the last 15 years documenting and dissecting the sex lives of African women to support women as they journey to their pleasure principle in the bedroom. Before we get to that conversation, we're going to take a short break and hear from our sponsor, Adama Loves Akara, which is currently available in Ghana, Sierra Leone, and online from Amazon. You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe. You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe. Welcome back. Let's meet our guest, African expert Nana Dakwah Sechiama. Nana Dakwah is an experienced writer and blogger on sex and sexuality. She started blogging about sex and sexuality in 2009 and has produced many content across different genres that include nonfiction, short stories, and essays. For most of her career, she has been writing purposefully and intentionally for an audience of African women. Nana Akua is the co founder of Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women, a media channel that creates stories, podcasts, festivals, you name it, that tell the experience of African women and sex, including sexuality and today's topic, pleasure. Her goal in writing about sex and sexuality is to create a safe space for African women to talk with one another about their bodies. She wants more African women to have pleasurable sex, don't we all? Nana Kwai is the author of the forthcoming book, Sex Lives of African Women, which will be out July 2021 from Dialogue Books and in spring 2022 from Astra House. Her stories have been published in It Wasn't Exactly Love and The Pot and Other Stories. She's also been featured in The Guardian, Open Democracy, and Essence. Welcome to the show, Nana. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Vickie. I am super, super excited to be here. And I also have to say that this is actually my first official conversation about the book. And I'm really happy that it is with you, a fellow amazing African feminist and such an amazing communicator. I'm really delighted to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've been looking out for your book. The only thing is, like, when you're in Ghana, you're like, how are we going to get it? Like, I know that problem is going to be solved.
It
But,
will be solved.
yeah, that's like, I'm like, every time I see a pre-order link, I'm like, oh, okay, wait, sorry, wait for the Ghana link. I'm waiting for
The Ghana link is coming.
Inshallah, we are waiting for it. What
Yes.
would you say is the biggest misconception about the sex lives of African women? And how does that impact the way African women experience sex?
Oh, that is such a great question. I feel like there's so many misconceptions, but one that I will talk about because I feel like I am getting to a stage where I will become impacted by that myself is the assumption that older African women do not enjoy sex, that older African women are not desirable, that somehow, they're dried up and shriveled and left on the shelf. So you mentioned earlier that, I'm part of a team that has multiple projects that speak about sex and sexuality. One of the current projects I'm working on is a podcast based on our blog, Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. And we have an episode which is about older African women and sex. And so we interviewed like 3 African women, one of whom is in her late 60s, one of whom is all of them are over 50. And they were all telling me how great the sex life is, how they still enjoy sex, how they desire it. And this is one of the misconceptions we have about sex, right? We look at aunties, at older women, and we kind of assume there's nothing going on for them in the bedroom, and that's not true. And so for me, that's a myth I'm really interested in busting, because your girl is now 43, so I'm no longer a hot young thing, even though I like to think I'm still, a hot
Girl, okay. Please, don't perpetuate myths here. We're here for
yeah, right?
hot young thing you are, okay?
Yes. And so yeah, for me, to really discover what reality is like, you need to speak to women from a variety of backgrounds. And I usually find that the more the woman herself has, in a sense, liberated her mind, right? Gone through a process of consciousness raising, whether she's a feminist or a humanist, or, has been through a process where she sort of questioned societal beliefs, the more free that person is. And that's one of the things I'm also discovering as I interview and speak to women about sex and sexuality.
Okay. So the first thing, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think a key part is, for example, like, we don't hear our mothers and our grandmothers ever talk about, "Ooh, I'm about to get me some," right? Or like express desire, sexual desire. As soon as you become a grandmother, like, and I think this is global, right? It's not
Yes.
just necessarily the African context, but just globally, that women somehow our sexual desire, go like plateaus, and then like there's a dip, while men's, in fact, we always think about men's actually going up. Like the older men get, the more their sexual desire, like, this whole idea of the dirty old man, right? Like, oh, he wants sex all the time. But as women get older, we're like desexualized, right? Which is like incredibly problematic. Speaking of older women, I wonder, we know that all aspects of life was transformed by colonialism. Do you think that this extends to the bodies of African women and sexual expression as well?
I think so, absolutely, because with colonization came colonial norms and values, especially like, at least I can speak about countries like Ghana, which were colonized by the British, and we totally were sold Victorian standards of, I don't even know what to call them because they were really not standards that anybody should aspire to, but it's like lie back and think of the country. And yes, that's really affected people even to today. I mean, it translates into a sort of fundamentalist approach people have to religion. I remember literally 2 days ago, I was in the queue to get vaccinated against COVID. And then this woman called me, and like she called me and she was like, "Oh, look at your top. Your stomach is showing. Jesus is coming." I was like, "What? Like, you really think that Jesus will be bothered about my stomach? Like, he's got nothing to be bothered about?" I mean, you know. So there's this policing of women's bodies, which
Yeah.
is also a result of people's approach to religion rather than thinking, yes, God loves all bodies. He made all bodies, or she made all bodies. And it really affects us. It really affects us. So I feel like to really like love your body, to really enjoy your body, you have to break free of what you've been told, what society tells you. And you can still do that, even as a person of faith, because it's really about how you're interpreting faith. There are some women I interviewed who are super, super religious. And actually, one woman said to me, she was describing marrying this man, and then basically talking about what they did for 3 days was pray and fuck, pray and fuck, and pray and fuck. And for her, that was super important because like for her, spirituality is really important, and sex is also important, and it's almost like two sides of the same coin. So I just want to emphasize that I don't think being religious means you won't have good sex, right? But I think one needs to question what you're told, and to find pleasure in everything. And I feel like pleasure is political, it's super important. And when people try to control women's bodies, control the way we dress, it's only a way of just trying to keep us in a box. And we need to break free out of all boxes.
Yeah, I don't know if it happened during colonialism or before, but I just always feel like women's bodies are considered state property. Men's
Yes.
bodies are their own. So whether it's like the mosque or the church or the government, that women's bodies are everybody's property. Like the state, the community, society, everybody has ownership of your body except for you, right? So that's why a stranger can see you in line and feel like she has she has a place, a right to comment
I know, right?
because you're public property. Your body is my body. How can you show our body like this? Yeah.
I know, right? It's really crazy. And I think you're right. It's about state control of bodies. I think it's also about, God, I had a thought that was running through my mind and it's totally gone now, but it'll come back. But I think it's also about capitalism, right? I think it's about, especially men who may be in relationships with women thinking that we want to control the body because we want to ensure that, whoever she reproduces comes from my sperm. And I've had some theories around, with capitalism also came the desire to control women's bodies because people wanted to ensure that their property gets passed down the line. Whereas I feel like Akan culture subverts that in a really nice way. And of course I'm Akan, so that's why I'm mentioning this, where you inherit from the matrilineal side of the family. So traditionally a man would pass on his property to his sister's children because those are definitely his kin. Yeah.
No, we're actually. I was at brunch today, and we were talking about the matrilineal inheritance in Ghana and how much we liked it. Why is African women's sexual pleasure or this like African women having sex so political, so secret, and so taboo. Right now, as we're having this conversation, there are people who are angry. I can tell you that already. That just being here to have this conversation, somebody is upset. And a lot of people would be upset that we're even talking about African women's sexual pleasure and African women and sex. Why is this such a difficult topic? Why is it so hard considering we're all products, right? We're all here because two people had sex. Why is it such a taboo in our communities?
I really think it's about a societal desire to control women. And if you want to control somebody, like literally you want to control their body, you want to control their expression. You don't want them to enjoy life. You don't want them to find joy in their bodies. You want them to think of their bodies as tools for reproduction, as tools for labor. And I feel like when a woman truly owns her body, when a woman is truly in touch with her own pleasure, she's truly powerful. If you cannot control her in the bedroom, you cannot control her in public spaces. She's going to step out there and she's going to own the world. And so I feel like this is why people try to control women's bodies, because they shut you down and then you can't do anything really. And if you don't own your body, right? If you don't own your pleasure, what can you truly own? Nothing. Yeah.
It's, a lot of times, like when I talk about politics, or I take a political position, some of the comments I always get are, it's because you don't have a man. You need to get married, right? This idea that, like, if you had a man, they would be somehow controlling you and you would behave in an appropriate manner. That this all you are talking, this freedom, this freedom to talk and express yourself is only there because, like, there isn't a man on top of you, right? And it's such a an attempt to diminish, because it doesn't really diminish if you do not if you don't subscribe to that. It doesn't diminish you because you're like, okay. Sometimes you may even be in a relationship, people don't recognize or realize that because you're not subscribing to their perception of what, like, a man and a woman's relationship ought to be, that you're not defined by that, right? So I can definitely connect to this idea of, yes, people thinking that, that sex is power, right? That, like, or when you're upset, you express dissent, or you're like, like, oh, what is it? Is your husband not giving it to you? Oh no, you're angry because you're not being satisfied. Like, it always kind of, but you never see that about, right, men. You don't see the same dialogue or discourse around men when they're talking, or nobody ever says, oh, is it because you don't have a wife at home, that is why you are being political like this? Do you understand what I mean? There's always this attempt to kind of go, like, they want to own your body, and then they always want to bring the conversation back to your gender and back to your genitals, right? Specifically back to between your legs.
Yes.
Which is so crass. And so you're like, wait, you want us to be pure and chaste, but at the same time, at every attempt you get, you want to come talk about this thing, but you don't want us to talk about this thing, right? So us having this conversation is instantly problematic for those who would rather women were not talking about this. Which brings me to my next question. I don't even know if it's a question. Yes, it is a question. For the African woman seeking sexual liberation over the things that they may have been taught to be taboo, where can she begin? Like, where do you start the journey?
It's a great question. And I feel like the journey actually begins with healing, right? And it begins with healing on so many levels. Sadly, so many African women have been sexually abused, right? For folks who live in Ghana, and I recognize that obviously this is a global show, so people may be watching all around the world, so the context will differ. But one of the things that I found really difficult is so many women that I interviewed had been sexually abused as children. Frankly, I myself was sexually abused as a child, right? And so for a lot of people to actually begin to find pleasure in your body, you need to go through some sort of healing. And everybody has a different thing that will work for them, right? Some people may want professional help. Some people will, there was one woman who decided to do a thousand, she started off wanting to do 100 days of celibacy. That went so well, she decided to extend it to 1,000 days. Some people will travel, and go deeper into themselves, go deeper into their faith. But healing is actually really, really important. And then I think you literally need to go on a journey. You need to unlearn what you've been told growing up, because very few of us were actually told anything positive about sex. Like, all we're told is don't do it. And usually people wouldn't even say what's the it was. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of unlearning. And you need to actually go on a journey to figure out what you would like. Because you can be with a partner, whether it's a male partner or a woman partner, or a partner who is, gender non-conforming, and still not be having pleasurable sex because all of you have various traumas that you're grappling with, right? And so I think it takes a lot of courage to find out what you find pleasure. I always say to people, like, try and give yourself pleasure, try and give yourself sexual pleasure. So you figure out what works for you.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
If you don't know what rocks your boat, how are you going to teach somebody else to give you pleasure? And I think you need to allow yourself to experiment, try new things, express your desires to your partner or partners. Obviously means you need to find partners who are also, have a similar mindset and are willing to explore with you and are going to be patient with you, because some sexual acts may trigger you because of things you've experienced in the past. And so I feel like it starts with healing, and then it means going on a journey that's very personal, that will look different for different people depending upon your context, you know. And I also feel like to arrive at sexual freedom, you almost need to be constantly arriving. You need to be constantly experimenting. You need to constantly try new things, because we also change, right? What might work for your body at the age of 20 might no longer work for your body at the age of 40. And yeah, these are some of the things I have learned from the interviews that I've done with women. And those are the three themes that I actually have in my book: healing, self-discovery, and sexual freedom.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, of course, as you speak, I'm like, am I sexually liberated, girl? Am I okay? Am I? It's like no, because I think that's where it starts. I mean, maybe I would say like a self check, right? It's
Yes,
about then. Before you know if you need healing, before you know if you need to go on a journey, you have to do a self check, right? You have to really sit with yourself and say, okay, what has my sexual experience really been? Has pleasure, my pleasure, been the center or been a focus in my sexual experiences?
mm-hmm.
Because sometimes you participate. And I remember when I was much younger, like, yeah, we've all had so many varied sexual experiences where you might participate and it's not your pleasure, it's not centered around your pleasure. And you
Yes,
don't even know that it's not centered around your pleasure, right?
yes,
And
yes,
before you're even whatever, it's finished, and you're like, I
yeah.
don't know if I don't know if I like that. Like, I don't know if that was good. Like, you don't even know, right? So I think, yeah, if everybody, men and women, but in this case, women, go into sex thinking, I want a pleasure-centered sexual experience. No
Yes.
matter who my partner is, no matter where it's happening, I want my pleasure to be principal, and maybe having conversation, right? Because the other thing is, I want to know if I mean, I'm hetero, and so I'd be like, okay, my guy, are you interested in my pleasure? Would
Mm-hmm.
you like to center my pleasure in this
Mm-hmm.
experience? If
Mm-hmm.
you're not here for me, let us not go for that, because
But I love to ask a question, right? Do you want to center my pleasure in this experience? And
yeah.
I think there are ways of making that sexy. I think sometimes people struggle with how do we have the conversation about sex? And you have to
Mhm.
find little ways of doing it that work for you. I love to WhatsApp with folks. So
Okay.
exactly. So
Okay, foreplay. Hello.
exactly. So you can be like, so I really want this to be a pleasure centered experience. Can I tell you what would really work for me? So before the
Yeah.
person comes over, they already know what's going to rock your boat. You've had the conversation. Having the
Yeah.
conversation doesn't mean it needs to be face to face, right? If that's difficult for you. And for me as well, it's also psychological. If you've had that conversation, your mind is getting primed and ready for sex, and your body is getting ready for sex too.
Mhm. Like, where do you like being kissed? on the I don't know what this is called, on the fold of your arm, is that something that gives you pleasure? I mean, like, I think it's that like slow thing, right? Coming
Yes,
into sexual relationships with this thing that every person is a book you haven't read.
absolutely.
And you want to go on the journey to explore them, but you also want it to be pleasurable for both of you. I'm clearly telling y'all how I do it, how I go into these situations. I be like, hey, boo.
I love it. I love it. And I feel like we have to do that all of the time with each
Every
new
time with
partner.
a new partner, yes.
You can't
Yes.
assume, oh, I've had sex with so many people and so I'm an expert. No, you're not an expert on,
No. On
everybody's body.
delivering pleasure to the next person, right?
Exactly.
Right. I can know you, I can be married to you for 10 years and we're good sexually, but I can meet somebody else and what works for them is a completely different thing. And if you're so overconfident and you have an ego, and you just go into it like, I know, then it's not about pleasure, right? It's about your ego.
And I would also say, if you've been married to somebody for 10 years, you probably need to switch things up. You might be thinking it's okay, and it may be okay, but could it be better than okay, right? Is it time for change? Is it time to like figure out new things? Has their bodies changed? Are they bored of routine? I know even I, when I'm dating somebody after 2 to 3 years, I'm like, we have gotten into a routine, and I know we're going to do A followed by B followed by C, and then we head to D. And yes, it works and we get off, but it also gets a bit boring, you know?
Thank you. No, oh girl, I'm so glad we're having this conversation in the panoramic because the panoramic is everywhere. This is a great time to reassess your sexual priorities, because some of us who are not married, we don't know what's going to happen in the future because you can't be going out and seeing people when there's COVID around.
I mean, I have to say to you, like, I just got my second vaccine and I'm like ready to do I want to take a sexy Instagram picture and invite people to slide into my DMs because it's the
Hey, hey. No,
so
but
yeah, this panoramic has been
I
it's
need
been
to
a
get
time.
I need to get it. I don't even have my first vaccine. So I'm like really all the way back on, oh, I need to talk to my Ghana friends to see how they can help me
Seriously.
get
Oh,
vaxxed so I can be ready for this, for summer 2021.
I
Cause
so ready. I'm like, it's like what you need a month after your second vaccine to be like fully covered. I'm ready, girl. I'm ready.
okay, so we're gonna take a short break. This is a good time, of course, to share this conversation because everybody needs to know about the sex lives of African women. And also, it's a good time to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe. You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe. Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, you're watching African Experts, and I'm your host, Vickie Remoe. With me on the show today is Nana, an advocate for sexual pleasure for African women. Today we're talking about The Sex Lives of African Women, which is the title of Nana's new book, currently available for pre-order from Dialogue Books. And here is an excerpt about the book. The Sex Lives of African Women uniquely amplifies individual women from across the African continent and its global diaspora as they speak of their diverse experiences of sex, sexualities, and relationships. Many of the women who tell their stories in this collection recall the journeys they have traveled in order to own their own sexualities. They do this by grappling with experiences of child sexual abuse, resisting the religious edicts of their childhood, and by asserting their sexual power. From finding queer community in Egypt to living a polyamorous life in Senegal to understanding the intersectionality of religion and pleasure in Cameroon to choosing to leave relationships that no longer serve them. These narratives are as individual and illuminating as the women who share them. The Sex Lives of African Women provides a deep insight into women's quest for freedom, highlights the complex tapestry of African women's sexuality, and bestows upon all women inspirational examples to live a truly liberated life. I cannot wait to read this book. Okay, is it okay? Would you be able to read a passage from the book with us? I know I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but I'm sure you have it because, girl, you're in comms marketing. You know this thing.
Yes, no, I'll be delighted to read an excerpt. And I also want to, I guess, tell people a little bit about what Africa, when I say Africa, what it means to me. So for me, I'm a Pan-Africanist, right? Which means that for me, Africa is people on the continent, as well as the people who, Africans throughout the diaspora, who are in the diaspora for a variety of reasons, including slavery, including colonization, and including, of course, migration. And so I purposely interviewed people who are not from the continent, but are descendants of Africans, right? And are Afro descendants. So I want to read an excerpt of my conversation with Chantal, a woman I'll call Chantal. Some people chose to use their real name. Some people chose to use pseudonyms. Chantal is a pseudonym, and she's from Haiti.
Okay.
Okay. How long do you want me to read for?
I wherever you naturally feel like whenever people are doing this, I feel like they know when they've shared something with us and like so you just take your natural time because we ain't got nowhere to go.
Okay, all right. Let me start from here. Mika lived next door to us. He came from a good family. My mother and the community of aunts that raised me trusted him. I felt safe with him too, even though he was only 15 years old, the same age as me. He was cute, the kind of cute you see on television. He would play his guitar, carry me on his back, and take me to the beach. He made me feel good about myself. He could see something in me that I could not yet see in myself. He would touch me, finger me, and eat my pussy with a passion. It took a week of preparation before we both lost our virginity together. He had a perfect tiny penis. Mika and I stayed together for 4 years. And then at 18, I moved to Montreal to attend university. And there I fell in love with a woman. I had always loved women. As teenagers, whenever we played mom and dad, I always assumed the role of a dad and would do anything the girls wanted. The woman I met in Canada was 7 years older than I was. She was prettier than I was. She had her shit together. I did everything she wanted me to. I did her homework, I bought her things, I even shoplifted so I could get her more gifts. One day, we were on the bus heading to the movie theater, which was several stops away from my house. No physical words passed between us, but when we got to my stop, we both got off the bus. I had never walked 3 blocks so fast before. We opened the door, our lips found each other right by the door, and there we stayed. Time whirled by in a blur of pleasure. I have no concrete memories. It was like a smoke filled dream. Learning each other's bodies, our lips clung to each other, and we twisted and turned our legs so that our clits could rub against each other. I screamed and screamed and screamed as I came. I'll stop there.
Okay. I feel like I should go smoke a cigarette and I don't even smoke. Wow, that's so powerful and also so um in many ways dynamic, right? Because this just like in this short snippet, one woman has had such like so much variety
Mm,
in her own sexual experiences, and we tend to think we don't think of like the full scale. You know what I mean? And I think that's the problem with the way we think of African women and sex is that we think of it as like this, you know,
yeah.
small, this very small box that everybody fits into, and we don't leave enough room to allow for diversity and like you know Jollof and Jambalaya because she seems like she's having her a good old time.
And that's really why I wanted to put this book together, right? Because I felt like when people think about African women and sex, they think in very myopic ways and,
Hmm.
have that sort of view of African women's sex and sexuality is really limited. And I wanted to show how expansive it is and the different experiences that people have and the different ways people can find pleasure, and people from different backgrounds who may be from small villages or from big cities, have an amazing sex. And of course, there's also trauma, and there's also people who are like figuring things out, but it's like a buffet. And
Right.
I had ever read a book which showed that expansiveness of African women's stories. And that's the book I set out to write. And I am very proud. I feel like that's also the book I wrote. So, yeah, people who are watching, please pre order.
No, I don't doubt it. I mean, I think also what's powerful about this kind of representation, sexual representation, is that you might think you're weird, right? I might be here, I have my kinks, I have my desires, but maybe I have a lot of shame also with them because I don't know what other women are doing. I don't know. You don't know, right? But when you have a book like this that covers such diversity and such range, both in age and experience, you pick it up and you're like, even if you don't see yourselves, you're like, oh, we are all doing all kinds of things. So you that maybe like liberates you and also takes away some of that guilt that a lot of us have been raised with, especially if you come from a very religious background. So thank you so much for putting this to get like I really can't wait. I'm just like this is gonna be like summer read, girl. We gonna be out at the beach, at the pool, like, girl, she did what? Okay. Flip, flip, flip. Snap, Twitter, hello.
But you really hit the nail on the head, Vicky, in terms of people feeling seen. I do want people to feel seen. And actually, my publisher, Charmaine Lovegrove, who is the publisher of Dialogue Books, the imprint, an imprint which is part of Little Brown in the UK, she sent me a message and she was like, oh my God, I had another editor send me a 5-minute long voice note speaking about how this is the first time she's really felt fully seen when she's read a book. And that really means a lot to me. And I'm really hoping as the book goes out into the world, and people read it, they will really feel seen. Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like without, I don't even have to say it, and you should know that they will because, you know, you've always centered African women in your work. It's always been like, I don't care who else cares, who else sees it. I'm talking to you, African woman. And I think whenever you do something that is for a specific community, because
Yeah.
there's so much intentionality that goes into it, because you're thinking about everything. It's like you've done an empathy map for African women's sexuality, and you're like, I'm going to give them all the ingredients that they need. And that's why your book is going to be a bestseller and it's going to be successful because we gonna be all up in this, okay? Because there might be
Thank you.
some ingredients we are not adding to our own sauce that we might want to sprinkle.
No, I tell you, I would like have a conversation with somebody and I'm like, noted for the next time. So yes, I feel like definitely. I also think about this book as a manual for sexual pleasure, and I feel like people will read it and also have lots of tips that they can, add to their own jollof and jambalia, like you said.
Okay, New York. That's what the New York Times should say when they review this. A manual for sexual pleasure. Like I love it. I mean, pleasure in general. In general, I center my life, a lot of my life, around pleasure because it's something that I wasn't necessarily raised. Like I don't think that when I was being raised, like my pleasure was centered, not sexual pleasure, but just like that I must enjoy myself. Enjoyment and fulfillment are not things that I grew up knowing or being told like I had a right to or that I should always strive for. And as I grew older, that truly, it more than anything, it's my pleasure. It's what, like, it has, even with food, like it's such a, like, I don't eat for eat's sake, I eat for pleasure. Like I have to feel
Mhm.
the everything, I must feel it, like.
No, I think it's super important, right? Like to feel sexual pleasure, you actually have to feel pleasure in every area of your life. And like food is super important. The connections between food and sex, so intense. So
Yeah.
intense. Yeah.
Pleasure in food, pleasure in like conversation, which is
Yes.
why I don't have a lot of friends, because I'm just like, if I'm sitting down with somebody, I want to feel like I'm eating them, like I'm consuming them and they're fulfilling me, like the laughter, the bigness. And then you come home and you're like, oh my God, that was such a
Yes.
good conversation.
I know exactly what you mean. And I think it's all part of it. It's all important, The food, the conversation. It's all about all our senses being engaged, moving our bodies, feeling pleasure in our own bodies and in our own selves. It's
Yes.
all connected.
Yes, no, I'm definitely a very sexual being, but I'm also a Scorpio, so that's like almost like you're saying like the sky is blue, like of course, like I was, this is I was designed, I was designed this way. Anyway, so what I would really like to know, did you find any stark regional differences around sex and sexuality between like African women in various parts of the continent? Are there cultures that place maybe more of a premium on African women's sexual pleasure?
Hmm. This is a great question. Um, and I want to say that instinctively no,
Okay.
you know, um, yeah, I don't feel like, and I interviewed women from all over, right? I interviewed
Patriarchy.
women
The
from,
patriarchy is
yeah,
strong.
the patriarchy is so strong. Wherever I interviewed women from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Haiti, Costa Rica, you know, the UK, and yeah,
This
yeah,
patriarchy is strong. No, it's, I honestly, I cannot think of. I know people are going to feel like this is an extreme expression, but I cannot think of anything worse than a woman who has sex every day, all the time, and doesn't have pleasure.
yeah.
Um, it just feel like to me, but again, I'm centering myself in this. It may not be the same for others, but it just feels like such a crime. It's like so criminal, when
I
you
think
think
it is.
of the when you think of the specialness that is in the sweetness, you're just like, hey, I want this for all my sisters.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. And like if you're having sex and you don't want to have sex, that's like how could you have consented to that, right? So I think like you're saying, it's actually literally a crime.
Yeah,
People could
perhaps
not just consent but enthusiastically consent.
Yeah. One of the saddest things I ever think I heard in my life was a married woman who said that she's so not attracted to her husband, she's so not in it, that every time she has sex with him, she feels like he's raping her. Like she's consenting to the sex. It's not like
Yeah.
she was saying like I didn't consent, but because she's so not into it, she's just like, I get
Yeah.
nothing from this. He might as well
Mhm,
be raping me. And I was
mhm.
just like, why are you still in that
Yeah.
relationship?
No, I also had a friend say to me how, at night she spends so much time. First of all, she's made her bathroom like super cozy, super comfortable because she spends a lot of time in there, hoping that by the time she comes out, her husband would have fallen asleep. And that's really heartbreaking. But, the reality is a lot of women are in that situation because they've never had the opportunity to discover sexual pleasure. They
Mhm.
didn't grow up knowing that their bodies were theirs, that they have a right to pleasure. I think for some reason or the other that their partners have not really been able to have those conversations with them. They haven't been able to find pleasure in sex, and so sex is a chore. It's something they have to do because they're a wife. For example.
Yeah, because I mean, when people are getting married, and I've never been married, but I just like, I've never heard anyone say, and as I was getting married, my mom told me, you should pleasure your wife, you should make sure she enjoys sex, da 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 da. Or even the other, what you always hear is the woman like make sure you give to your husband when he wants, so he doesn't go to the street. Da, da. I've never heard a man say my
Yeah,
mom or my dad or my boys like gave me advice where they were like, you really need to center your wife's sexual pleasure or your woman's sexual pleasure. Like never, never. I've never. It's not in the lexicon. Like people don't talk about that.
it's not.
Um,
But what's also interesting that it enters the lexicon as a reason for breaking up. So one of the women I interviewed, for example, was telling me that what she discovered, and she's Muslim, that actually your husband not having sex with you is grounds for divorce, right? And that's like she was unhappy because they used to have a great sex life, and then they got married, then they had a child, and she discovered that as her belly was growing, her husband was just desiring her less, you
mhm.
know. And then after she had a child, it was like she always had to be the one to initiate sex, and then you'd be like, "Why are you forcing things?" And
Right.
she had gone like a year or two without sex, and she discovered
Yeah.
that actually this is grounds for divorce. I believe in Akan culture. That's also something quite similar. That's in a
Yeah,
sense,
I
yeah.
mean, I do believe that like in a relationship where neither party is like having pleasure or one party is not having sexual pleasure, if y'all can't fix that, why are we here?
Exactly.
Because sex is such an intimate space. It's just so full and whole. It's so all encompassing that if you're doing that and it really is serving no purpose other than to feed another person, right? It's like, are you what? Like you're just telling me, like I'm just doing this for you. Like, what is that?
Exactly. Yeah. There's no point. There's absolutely no point.
Do you think that things are changing? Like, okay, so for Gen Z Africans, not us millennials, maybe you can say for us, maybe for us, if you ain't getting pleasure right now, you're in your late 30s or late 20s. I don't know. Maybe you can say our generation, some of us might, some of us may not. But do you think that Gen Z African women are more liberated and experiencing more pleasure, or are we all in the same boats?
No, I mean, I actually have a lot of faith in young people. Usually, when I'm at an event, at a festival, I would always have young women come to me and say, "Thank you so much for adventures. It enables me to have conversations with other women, conversations that I can have with my mother or my aunties." And so I feel like because of spaces like this, Vicky, like your show, like adventures, like other platforms like Whole Africa, The Spread, there are more spaces for conversations on sex and sexuality. And that encourages people to take things into their own hand, to question what they've been told, to be more exploratory, to discover their own desire. And so I don't think Gen Z is in the same situation that some of us were growing up. And even for us, like we're learning, we're changing, right? So yeah, I have hope.
It's not broken, right? Like no one can, I don't know, maybe there is, when you watch a lot of like shows, there's a condition of all kind. I'm sure there's some condition somewhere where someone is incapable of having sexual desire. I'm sure there's one point something percent of the population, right?
Yeah,
But
people who are
everyone is
bisexual, for example,
exactly.
or aromantic. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know it's possible, but for the majority of us, no matter your age, you can have sexual pleasure, right? You just need to do the steps that we've been talking here today. Ask yourself this question about, are you really enjoying yourself? Is this really satisfying you? Pleasure going on that journey that you said. And for some people, it is a question of like sexual healing, not the kind that Marvin Gaye said, but like a sexual healing, trying to get over trauma and abuse from like past that. And I know you were talking about Ghana specifically, talking about high cases of sexual abuse, but in Sierra Leone, it's just as high. It's still high today. So we're not even talking about like, oh, our parents' generation, because our parents' generation, our grandparents, you can say all of the girls, all of them married when they were children, right? Majority, like everybody married before they were 18, probably in some village and gave your way. But even today in Sierra Leone, sex abuse is a huge problem. We had a national emergency against rape a couple years ago. That's how bad it is, and it hasn't gone down. Last year, they recorded victims. The youngest was 3 months. The oldest was 100 years. Cases of like sexual abuse. So it is still a really, really big problem. Some people have said, I saw this somewhere and I wanted to ask you, do you believe that sexual pleasure is a human right?
Oh, absolutely. I believe sexual pleasure is a human right because it's your body, right? It's something that you own. And especially if you are actually having sex with somebody else, if it's not pleasurable, then it's probably painful, it's uncomfortable, it's making you miserable. And yeah, so I feel like we all deserve to have pleasure in our bodies, and acts that are done to us so that we don't have sexual pleasure, like female genital mutilation or cutting, that's a human rights abuse. Yeah. And that's all done just to take away women's rights to pleasure. So absolutely, I think of sexual pleasure as, you know, as a fundamental human right.
And then before we go to question, just have one last question, which is, what would you say to the woman who's afraid to advocate for her sexual pleasure in her relationship today because she is afraid maybe that her partner might see her as promiscuous, or like, do you understand what I mean? Like, maybe she's gone on this journey on her own, maybe separately, and now she wants to come in the bedroom like, Wonder Woman, I am here, but is afraid because she doesn't want her partner to think that it is coming from an external. Do you understand what I mean? Like,
I
oh, you
do.
didn't like this before. Who has taught you? Do you understand? How do they negotiate this new relationship where they want to now become their own like pleasure advocates?
I know my answer is going to sound very harsh, but I feel like if you're in a relationship with somebody and you really cannot talk to them about sexual pleasure and about the kind of pleasure you want to experience, you need to really ask yourself if that's a relationship you need to stay in. Maybe that's a relationship you've outgrown, or maybe that's a relationship that's not right for you. In a way, you're not fulfilled in that relationship.
Right.
So
Right.
yes, you can always have a conversation with your partner and tell them, what you've learned, what new things you'd like to try, the fact that you've changed and now you know things that you didn't know because you've read about it, you've watched YouTube videos, you've watched Vickie's show. But if the response from that partner is going to be, where's this coming from? Who have you gone to taste? My sister, I
One
beg.
of one of like the most scary yet sexually liberating things I ever done was actually sharing the kind of porn that I read, because I love literotica, with like
Yes.
someone I was dating. I didn't want to, but like he was just like, "No, I want to see." I was like, I cover my face. But I sent it, and it was like really actually great, because to then have a conversation, right, about like, oh, what do you, he read it and he was like, well, what do you really like about this? And then being able to verbalize that, and that really actually helped our sexual relationship, because then it was like, oh, I see you, miss. I'm like, yes.
But I think that's exactly the kind of response you want from a partner, right? Which is what I was saying earlier, like WhatsApp stuff, like text stuff, like email things. It can be hard to have a direct conversation, but it's nice to have these little ways that help you to share without maybe you having to say it. And then you want the encouraging response, and then you want the, oh, let's talk about this. Oh, this was hot too. Oh, I didn't like this, but I like this. But if you're
Right.
really going to get the opposite reaction, then that's not a relationship you need to stay in. I'm sorry. I don't believe until death do us part, especially if you're unhappy. There's no need to stay there and die, you know?
You see, this is why we're sisters, because I always tell people, like, listen, Outcast said, if nothing is forever, then what makes love the exception? Why are we so in denial when we know
Yes,
we're not happy here?
yes,
Why?
yes, yes. There's this saying that my mom loves to say, and she doesn't mean it literally, but I love the literal meaning. And it's a saying in tree, and I'll say it and translate it. Usru awarijaya, wunya awarepa. Basically, if you're scared of divorce, you will never get a good marriage. You can't act in life like if you say something to the person you're with, they're going to leave you, or because if you do, you're just always going to be stuck. And actually, sometimes people need to leave so better people can come into your life. So if you're having really bad sex and you've tried to have the conversation and it's not working out, my sister, find a way to walk away and just create space for the good sex to flow your way.
Hallelujah. I'm here for this. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, my sisters. Hallelujah. Now we're going to see if we have any questions. Mr. Producer, I know my producer is here, is in the background. Do we have any questions? Yes. This is a question from Tamu, who is my life coach. Hey, Tamu. How do we change this for younger generations, as the current alternative is over sexualization? That's a really good question.
Hmm. I mean, in terms of changing the situation for younger generations, for me, it really starts with speaking to young people about their bodies, from a really early age, naming body parts as they are, um, teaching them what consent means, because sadly, a lot of young children are not taught about consent, and letting them know that their bodies are theirs. I'm raising a young child, a girl. I mean, she's super young, so I'm not having to deal with these issues now. But of course, I've been thinking for a long time about how do I want to educate my child differently about sex. And one thing I know I want to do when she's at the appropriate age is I don't want to say to her, don't have sex like I was told with nothing else. I want to say, you know what? There's no need to rush into having sex with other people. You really want to spend some time discovering yourself. You might
Yeah.
want to start off by buying a toy and finding out how to give yourself pleasure before you even get to the stage where you're talking about sex with other people, right? And for me, just that's just my thinking. I'm not an expert in the subject. I have to say, I'm not professionally trained. It's just what I think, and based on what I have learned and taught myself over the years and the conversations I have had with so many people. So I think for the younger generation, it's telling them about their bodies, helping them to understand their bodies, helping them to understand that sex and sexuality is on a spectrum, right? So if your child is a queer child, they're not thinking, oh, the fact that I'm not feeling desire towards, a man if they're a woman means there's something wrong with me. And for me, this is how we change things.
Of
Yeah.
course. No, absolutely. Do you have another question? Oh, okay. Is there a difference between pleasure and orgasm?
Yes, 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 absolutely. There's a difference between pleasure and orgasm. I think of pleasure as enjoyment, as something that makes you feel good. And I think of orgasm as reaching a pinnacle. It's a physical sensation, it's a crescendo, and then there's a sort of tapering off, and then you kind of calm down, right?
Yeah.
Pleasure is continuous. And I think you can have pleasurable sex that doesn't result in an orgasm.
Yes.
Um,
And I mean, let's be honest. When a woman is raped or somebody can be sexually abused and have an orgasm while
yeah.
not having any pleasure. So, the orgasm is more like the physical sensation. The pleasure, it's the like whole body ooh ah experience.
Exactly, exactly. You said it perfectly. Yes,
Yeah, the whole
yes.
body.
I like both. I want to have pleasure and I also want to have an orgasm.
No, I mean, yeah, but just to separate them out,
Personally.
like,
Oh,
it is
I agree.
possible that those two things
Yeah.
aren't necessarily the same.
And people
Um,
have orgasms all of the time and they haven't actually enjoyed sex, right? It's just a physical
yeah,
release. Yeah.
exactly. Like you could give yourself an orgasm and
Yeah.
you've had an orgasm, but you don't really enjoy, you know what I mean? You're not like, oh my God, this was like so good. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, I just had the release because I'm a human being
Yeah.
and this energy was pent up and it needed to get out of my system. Now let
Exactly.
me go finish my essay.
Yes. I know the feeling. You're like, I need to sleep. I'm a bit tired. Okay, where's the toy? Let's do this job very quickly. Okay,
Yeah,
now we can go to bed.
yes, it's like this nonsense orgasm. Let me just get it out of here so I can like, like body and mind can be in one place because you cannot
Yes.
be on the left and I'm on the right. No, totally. Um, Thank you so much, Anna, for coming on the show. It's been such a joy talking to you. For those who missed it, I just want to say again that Nana's book, The Sex Lives of African Women, is out in July, but it's currently available for pre order. You can go to Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk. You can pre-order the Kindle version or the ebook version, and you can also pre-order the hard copy. So please get this book, support this book. It's like a orange book with like a green text. It's beautiful, and Nana has done a really great job chronicling our sex lives and experiences, and it's going to be a lesson for all men and women. I would like to encourage you men out there who want to ensure that your partners are having a pleasure filled sexual experience to read this book. so that you guys can all enjoy yourselves. With that, we've come to the end of today's show. I would like to thank the production team at vrcmarketing.com, Sierra Leone's leading media productions, communication, and online marketing agency. Thank you to Frank Vin, Bob McEwen, Abdul Hamid Kanu, Alassane Kargbo, Salwa Kamara, and Augustine Cardbook. And of course, thank you to our guests, Nana Dakwa, and all of you across the continent and in the diaspora for tuning in today. For more information about this or other episodes of African Experts, please visit our website on africanexperts.net. Here is our quote today. When a woman decides to sleep with her partner, there is no wall she will not scale, no fortress she will not destroy, no moral consideration she will not ignore at its very root. There is no God worth worrying about. Those words are from Gabriel Garcia Marquez from Love in a Time of Cholera. Until next week, una tata and tenki from all of us here at African Experts. See you next Sunday.